Hi there, this is Lisa Smith from Convergence. Welcome to our creative prayer time, exploring the path or the way of Jesus. It's something that we've been exploring and traveling along together over a long time. But over the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on abiding and following in the way, creating frameworks and practices that help us to walk in the way of Jesus. So there are lots of different ways of talking about this. But tonight, I want to focus on the idea of kenosis, specifically as talked about by Cynthia Bourgeault and some of her teachings. But before we get into that, I want to kind of go back to one of the things that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, this idea of the one thing, another way of looking at tangible ways of following Jesus. This quote was something that I shared from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks in his book, To Heal a Fractured World. He says, many dots scattered here and there certainly constitute a multiplicity, but the same number of dots ordered around a single point at the center form one circle. This is your duty in life, to place at the center of your life the one. And then you need have no worry about dualities. Every new dot you acquire will then merely expand the circle, but its unity will remain. To me, this gives an intense amount of focus and relief as I look at all the different dots that make up my life, all of the different obligations and desires and things that I just have to do on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it feels like I don't know where to look. I don't know which one is the most important. And then when this dot is put in the middle, this focusing on God, focusing on Christ as the center of my life, the place, the source of my identity, of my joy, of my rest, then everything else sort of comes into focus. It becomes more balanced. For me, it's like when you're dancing and you're trying to turn, do a pirouette or something, a dancer finds a spot on the wall or a spot in front of them to focus on so that each time they turn, there's a place that their focus comes back to so that they don't get dizzy. It's the same kind of thing as I'm focusing on all these little dots. To have one dot that I can keep my focus on keeps me from getting lost and from getting dizzy. But I suspect that for some people, it maybe just adds anxiety and pressure to talk about this. It feels like there's just one more thing to do when we already feel ill-equipped to do whatever it is we're supposed to do. And I say it's appropriate. If you feel those feelings, that's good. That gives us a clue about what we sense Jesus is inviting us into and whether or not it's good news. Right? So if this is an invitation to follow Jesus and it doesn't feel good, if it's not good news, or we're not receiving it as good news, then something is awry and we need to adjust and think more deeply about this. Oftentimes we've heard the good news of the gospel as an invitation to believe what Jesus did and try to behave like him in order to have a good life or to please God. And it's definitely true that we are invited to believe, to behave, and to please God. But we often limit our scope of believing to simply believing in Jesus, or believing he was who he said he was, or that he did what the Bible said he did. And we limit our behavior to being good, and we limit our concept of pleasing God to what we've learned pleases us, or maybe what pleased our parents or our bosses or our friends or our social circles. But Jesus invites us to something much bigger, much deeper, more radical and far more powerful. It's nothing less than complete and utter transformation, occurring from the inside out, not by our effort or by our power, but by a lifelong process of what Jesus called dying to self. We've talked about it at Convergence as fermentation, and you can see those videos on our website. Jesus invites us not just to believe in him, but to believe what he says. Believe what he says about God, the world, about us, about others, the future, worry. Believe what he says about worry. Do we believe what he says about worry? Obedience, wholeness, life. And he invites us not just to behave, but to walk in a way of radical self-emptying that leads to the joy, peace, and sense of completeness and identity that we long for. And he invites us to believe that the only way to please God is to let God be in love with you and let that make you fall in love with God. The first step on that path is something called kenosis, a Greek word meaning to empty out. And in this sense, to not cling. So this word kenosis comes from Philippians, where Paul is describing to the church at Philippi, okay, you want to know what it means to put on the Christ? Here's the mind of Christ. Here's what it's like. He goes on to say that though Jesus' state was that of God, yet he didn't deem equality with God something he should cling to. Rather, he emptied himself and assumed the state of a slave. He was born in human likeness. He, being known as one of us, humbled himself, obedient unto death, even death on a cross. And in this, God raised him on high and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Here's the interesting thing. In the very moments and in the very action of Jesus's kenosis, Cynthia Bourgeau writes, in the very moments of this humbling, of this letting it be, of non-entitlement, in that very action of not clinging, God simultaneously elevates, because the two are unbroken. That's the core of it. That's the path. Jesus invites us to this radical self-emptying, this radical not clinging. And in that process of following that path of self-emptying, we are simultaneously lifted up into wholeness, into fullness, into joy, into co-heirs with Christ, into being children of God. It's in this radical letting go that we find freedom and life. It's the same thing of dying to self and finding life in Christ. Kenosis, pouring out, act of emptying or non-clinging. So we're invited to put on the mind of Christ. And I invite you to start by asking, what is your mind? What does your mind tell you? What are you clinging to? What are you grasping at? Let's try this week an exercise of putting on the mind of Christ, accepting his invitation to non-clinging. So let's see, how could we take a step on this path this week? Maybe it's by starting at least by noticing what you're clinging to. Often these are the spaces and the places where we get irritated or annoyed or insulted or disappointed by unmet expectations, or maybe just feel a little too much self-satisfaction and superiority. What I invite you to do is just notice that, take a deep breath, and release, bringing ourselves back to the mind of Christ by releasing. So there are prayer practices like centering prayer, which definitely help to train us in this way of thinking. And it does take training. It's not something that you say, okay, I've got it and I'll do it. I'll be good now. No, you have to train your mind, your heart to automatically think this way. And centering prayer, these habits and practices are the way that we put on the mind of Christ so it becomes a part of our natural rhythm. And that is what slowly begins to transform us as we practice letting go and creating space to be filled up by Christ. This is one of those tangible steps, just noticing what we cling to and then breathing release. So now I'm going to play a song by a young artist named Lauren Daigle called I Believe. So now's the time to grab your journal or paper or coloring utensils. You might write emptied himself or poured out or non-clinging at the top of your page. And then I just invite you to draw lines or doodles or images or any of the exercises that we've done in the past, whatever kind of works for you. And just write words, images, whatever, to help connect your mind and your heart as I play the music so that we can reflect together. Now, one little note here, I feel like playing this right now could be a little bit emotionally manipulative, but I want to do it. Okay, so I'm telling you, I'm doing it intentionally because I want to connect to your heartstrings. The lyrics are really simple, but powerful in a ballady kind of way, you know, and I want to talk to the you deep inside, which you are protecting from me right now with your intellect and your distance behind the screen. I want to get in there because I want you to open up to this. We're on a progression now to walk this path together. And this way of Jesus is a tangible path we can actually walk, and it will actually lead to transformation if we follow. So I want to get into that inner you. And I want you to walk away tonight with this question on your mind. What if this week, each time I'm confronted by an area where I'm clinging to something, or I'm grasping onto an idea of how things should be, the way I want it, how I need it to be in order to be good enough, or how God should act so I will trust him, or of my own power or authority or identity or whatever, what if I practiced radical unclinging, ungrasping? If I just let go and poured what I see as myself out and believed what Jesus says about himself, about the world, about others, about me, without excuses. What would my week be like if I followed Jesus on his path this week? Let's reflect on that as we listen to this song by Lauren Daigle.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I'm strong when I think I'm weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. And when I don't belong, You'll have every failure, God.